What makes a good teacher? This is something asked frequently. However, there is no simple answer. Albert Einstein once said that it is the supreme art of the teacher to awaken joy and creative expression and knowledge. For me, this quote epitomizes what a good teacher is, but I wanted to further my understanding of what makes a good teacher. I thought the best way to do this was to ask a student teacher. Kat?
Hi, my name's Catherine Glass.
The head of department of PE at Ormiston Senior College, Jeff. A lecturer at the University of Auckland, Dawn. A Year 9 student at Glendowie College, Hannah. A Year 13 student at Ormiston Senior College, Pax. The first question I asked my respondents was, what makes a good teacher?
I think a good teacher is a teacher who is easily relatable to students but knows that professional boundary. One that's not going to be overly kind of trying to be your friend, but at the same time they know that they're helping you rather than kind of just standing up in front of class, going through different classes and not really caring about them. So I guess a teacher that really cares about their students and has their best interests at heart, I think, is what makes a good teacher.
I think having respectful relationships, both ways, with most students you teach. High expectations, not holding grudges. We talk.
Somebody who's got the kids' interests at heart, who's thinking about learning from a student's perspective, not from their perspective of what it is to teach, but what it is to learn. So flipping that over and thinking to yourself that, you know, why is this class in front of me? What is it that they want out of the lesson?
A teacher has to be hardworking and they have to put effort into their lessons. You plan them out, not just go with the flow, because you never know what could happen. They give extra time to students who need it. So if a student doesn't understand something, they don't just get them to ask other students. They actually give extra time to help them out. They have to be passionate, because if you're not passionate about your work, why would you be teaching it to other students who need to learn it? They have to be organised, because no one likes an unorganised teacher who loses work and doesn't know what they're doing. And they have to be disciplined, but they have to make students want to learn, like let students want to learn at the same time.
Being able to relate to the kids, being able to sequence content so that it's understandable, giving it in a variety of different ways so that different students interact in it differently and learn in different ways.
A really good one would be one that connects with students,
Right.
the ones that actually knows different students.
Being a lifelong learner and constantly striving to learn new things, new approaches, new ways to help the learners in front of you. I think subject knowledge is important, as well as getting to know the learners in front of you and what helps them best. So being a student-centred teacher.
I then went on to ask who was their favourite teacher and least favourite teacher, and then asked if these were their best and worst teachers. These were the responses that I got.
Yeah, I'll say so, yeah.
Probably not, to be honest. Mrs. Atfield's, she was my favourite teacher. It's really hard for me to reflect if she was the best.
Oh, I think I've had worse teachers than Mrs. Edwards. I remember Bim Thornton was absolutely useless. He just used to write things on the board, and I remember a university lecturer who was absolutely useless, who never taught us anything.
No, I think my best teacher I had was Miss McLaughlin, she was an amazing classics teacher and could also teach all maths levels as well. she knew her content knowledge really well. She was able to adapt to different students and kind of always was really relatable. But she just wasn't my favourite teacher because I didn't have the strongest bond with her, but she was still a good, probably the best teacher I had.
Nowadays, I don't suppose that I would consider what Mr. Moore did to be best, but at the time he was effective, but I don't think it's effective today.
Surprisingly, only Pax, the year 13, found his favourite and least favourite teachers to be his best and worst teachers. The rest of my respondents said that they actually had better and worse teachers than their favourite and least favourite. I was interested to see if perspectives changed and to see why people have different views on what makes a good teacher.
I think a lot of people's experiences at school cloud what they think is good and what is bad.
Through different experiences people have. So if we think of teachers who work in different schools will have, first of all, different approaches, different philosophies, different pedagogical approaches within that institution, which then gives them different ideas on what makes a good teacher. So I think it depends where somebody's been and the experiences they've had.
The way they learn. Some people might want just a set of rules to do and just not to do them and not to connect with the teacher. Just to do your work, get in, get out, and that's it.
I think a lot of things do work. I think it's finding out which works the best for the environment you're in as well.
Some people like teachers that are more disciplined, some people like teachers that are more laid back and let them do what they want. And it's also parents' views on it too that influence their child's views.
I think that some people like teachers and remember them for they were nice and friendly, but they didn't actually teach them anything. So I think that there's a huge range of why some people think that teachers are good.
To sum up what was said, your view can be persuaded by family, friends, previous teachers, and experiences. Teaching is always changing, adapting, and developing, so I wanted to see what my respondents thought was next for teaching.
I think it's a very interesting kind of age to be in, especially with all the technology and stuff coming through, and being at a school where they've just brought in bring your own device to the younger age groups. It's actually really interesting because there's some teachers which are really like flourishing in it and using all these new technical kind of appliances and stuff available, but then there's the teachers who aren't willing to change. So I think the teachers that are more willing to adapt to the new kind of technological sides of teaching are really going to kind of thrive, I guess, in the new era of teaching, being open.
I see teachers having to become, all teachers having to become really reflective, innovative facilitators who use the latest technology to support learners. So you probably won't see teachers at the front of the classroom as much. I think that'll be a thing of the past.
I think the capacity to individualise students' learning in the kind of like the modern learning environment, so to maximise the potential that we've got for students to be able to connect with the internet, to be able to connect with one another, to be able to connect with us as teachers on a one-to-one or one-to-many or many-to-one kind of basis, so that each person is going to have their own really specialised, individualised learning network. I think that's the next thing.
I think, technology is definitely taking the world a lot. I think technology will be used way more with teaching, but it's good. Some technology can be good, like interacting with the class, but we need to keep some pens and paper in the classroom, not just technology.
I think students will have a big proportion of the day on electronic devices, and I could even see the structure of schools changing, where it may become more of a drop-in centre, so the students are accessing their learning 24/7 from different places. It could be home, it could be in a place of work, it could be, I don't know where it will be, and then they're coming into school to get a tutorial, a seminar, a lecture, advice from an LA, advice from a teacher, small group work, but why the traditional 9 to 4 of school with bells and lessons? It seems like that's very old-fashioned, and the future of teaching is going to go away from that.
It's interesting to hear a common theme of technology. It seems to be known as the next big thing in teaching that will hopefully help students to learn and be more engaged. The best evidence synthesis states that there are 10 specific characteristics that make a good teacher. I picked out 7 of these characteristics to see if these were agreed to. The first characteristic is quality teaching is focused on high standards for student achievement. These were the responses I got.
Yeah, I think that we should have high expectations for our students, and that doesn't mean passing an exam well. It means all sorts of things like being committed to being an independent and lifelong learner themselves. I'd rather have a student who left my class knowing how to learn than having passed.
Yeah, high standards are really important.
Yeah, but it depends what standards it is that you have made clear your expectations.
A good teacher is focused on getting the maximum potential out of individual students rather than just an overall kind of success to every single student regarding them as one whole group.
Yes and no. So yeah, I guess a teacher should expect them to strive to achieve. They shouldn't always demand it. They can be overly strict about it.
The next question that I asked was focused on this characteristic. Good teaching practices enable classes to work as caring, inclusive, and cohesive learning communities. These were the responses that I got.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it, for learning? That they have the confidence to do that, and it's a skill as well, to be able to learn those skills to do that in small groups and whole groups.
It depends on your context, doesn't it? If you were just on a one-on-one basis, you could still be a good teacher. So if I was a special needs teacher, I could still be fabulous, but I'd just be working one-on-one, but I would expect the relationship between me and that one person to be really positive and warm and inclusive. But in a normal classroom, I think it's really important that you set that environment and the atmosphere so that everybody is working together to build that positive learning environment. People are not afraid to take risks, to make mistakes, because I think we learn more from mistakes than we do from successes. I think that people teach one another, and in teaching something to somebody else, you learn how to do it yourself much better.
Yes, there should always be a good kind of environment for students so they can feel comfortable. I think if you have a really negative kind of environment for students, they're not going to be willing to kind of answer questions or answer in a debate any kind of thoughts they have in their head, so they're just going to sit back and not really engage in the class. But if you have a nice environment for the students to really engage in, then I think that's really beneficial for their learning.
I think a good teacher does genuinely care. I think you really see if a teacher doesn't.
Even working in pairs, I really like using the whole think, pair, share. They think about a thought, they share it with their peers and then discuss it as a class.
The next question that I asked was focused on this characteristic. Effective links are created between school and other important contexts of students' lives. These were the responses that I got.
Yeah, I think that's vital, isn't it? A student needs a link to what they're learning.
I'd say so, yeah. Because then it would make the students understand more, so they can relate to a past experience in their life, and that can make them easier for their work.
I guess that's kind of hard because none of my teachers really did kind of link it to my life, kind of. So I think it's something that I'll try and adapt into my practice.
So what do they already know? That prior learning, even if they don't know much, to have that prior learning of something to do with the subject in their lives or what they've learned before is really important, and then they can apply that to some new learning instead of being told and this is what you need to learn, this is what you need to learn. They need some kind of linkage and ownership. If you can do that, then you get vested interest, I think, from the students.
The next question I asked was in relation to a few of the characteristics. These characteristics were based on activities. These were the responses that I got.
I like having interactive activities. It lets us get work done hands-on. Also, it's a better way, I think it's a better way to remember information because you're not just reading off a paper, you're actually doing it yourself. So I think it's better. I like interactive learning.
Half, really. I mean, because it does get boring always for both the teacher and the student. For the teacher to be standing there talking to the students, and for the students to be there listening all the time.
Yes, I think so. I think if you had your whole time teaching as an interactive kind of activity, then it would get a bit too much, and there's no actual kind of, just sometimes you need to just write something down so you have it. So I think interactive learning and activities are really important because it really engages the students and it really gets them motivated for their own learning. I think it would be hard to have interactive activities 24/7 in a classroom.
Because you've got to engage the kids in different ways. That's all that other stuff about, people learn in different ways. Some people learn when they're moving around, some people learn when they're drawing, some people learn when they're listening, some people learn when they're reading something or discussing. So you need to have all those sorts of activities built into a unit of work so that everybody has a chance to be learning in their preferred learning styles.
Classroom subjects, they do have interactive activities. It just depends on the teacher again, if they like interacting with their students or if they're disciplined.
It'd be a good break from just always in class doing work.
Yeah, I think so. So much out there now with technology that I think if you're not using technology now, and it's a challenge for me. I'm not a naturally gifted technologist, but I'm really enthused by it and how it can help learning. And if you don't use technology, I think you're going to lose your students because that's where they are now.
The next question I asked was if good teachers adapt to individuals' learning. These were the responses that I got.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy for the teacher.
I think you can't adapt to each individual's learning. In a class of 30, you can be aware of it, but you can't suddenly change a whole course just to be in tune with that one kid who can only learn if they're sitting in a beanbag.
Yeah, it can be really hard to assess and evaluate, but I think it's quite easy to say, I know my learners, but to know them individually, if they're going to learn kinesthetically or auditory, visually, to understand that can be really powerful.
I think you need to provide in one lesson a wide range of individual kind of activities for the different learners. So say like a written task or a drawing task or kind of a collaborative discussion task, all in kind of one lesson rather than just copying down notes and stuff. And that way you can target students with these individual needs. But it is very hard to adapt your one lesson to 30 individual students.
Sometimes you can't adapt, but you can certainly have a spread of different range of approaches so that every kid at some point becomes engaged. Well, I think that kids need to learn how to learn in different ways. They have to be aware of what their preferences are, but I don't think that there's one particular way to teach individual students.
And being able to identify different students' strengths in different situations. So some students one week may be taking the lead in an activity, whereas the next week it may be somebody totally different. It's not always the good kids who are good at something.
Yeah.
That could change.
So I think a wide range of activities, kind of teaching about the same thing would be good, but to individualise for every single student would be a bit hard.
The next question I asked was in relation to this characteristic. There is a match between the curriculum goals and the resources supplied to achieve those goals. These are the responses that I got.
I think the NZC should really, fall naturally out of learning guides and units of work and lesson plans. I think that should naturally come out of a lesson plan which is well structured.
The curriculum is really the guiding document in New Zealand, as it should be, because it's what the government wants for every student across the country to understand.
Well, that's what kind of the curriculum's there for and what is kind of outlined, I guess. At the same time, it's kind of like a guide of what we should be teaching, but we're actually teaching the skills of being a learner. So the curriculum is kind of like a guide for us to guide students really to be lifelong learners.
Yeah, I think it's really important that it's linked. Not just the end part, but the vision statement, the key competencies, the values, all of those things are what we should be focusing on, and how we teach those key competencies and values is just through different curriculum areas.
The next question I asked was in relation to this characteristic. Good teaching supports and guides each student's individual learning journey. These were the responses that I got.
Yeah, I agree that should happen as well. Again, it all goes back to knowing those learners and helping people individually.
Some teachers like to teach the whole class as a whole to allow equal learning, but some teachers do treat people individually. They'll ask how your day has been and what you've done in the weekend,
I guess it depends on how many students you've got, because it's really hard to guide, 30 plus students in one class, and then you've got 5 classes, so that's 180 odd students that you can't really, guide in that way. And there's always going to be students that aren't going to connect well with you no matter how hard you try. So I think it's good that you try, but at the same time you might not succeed.
Most of the time they do treat you as an individual. It's just that also they can treat the class as a whole, because learning gets done faster that way.
I don't think we can. Not when you've got 120, 150 students passing through your classroom every day. You can't guide each student individually.
I prefer either one. Class learning's fine because you can do the work individually as they teach, but also I like it when a teacher asks how you've been and gives you extra time if you need it.
The last question I asked referred to this characteristic. Effective, purposeful assessment focuses on and leads to improved student learning.
I think assessment is a very strong part of teaching. You need to always formatively assess students throughout the class, knowing if a student is kind of engaging, and if they're not, thinking of ways how to adapt so they can kind of really engage in the class.
They know where their learners are at the moment and where they should be going, and they have a variety of different ways of assessing whether or not they're on the right track, and hopefully they're giving them information about how to get there faster, or what they've missed out on, or where their weaknesses are as well as their strengths.
So not only is there formative assessment that you need to worry about, but having summative assessment, you can see how much they've actually learnt as well, or how much they've rote learnt, but hopefully that they've learnt.
Yeah, assessment's a really interesting one. Something I'd like to learn more about. It's quite easy to use TKI assessments because they're safe for NCEA. And using something which is really safe is not always good for the students. It might be good for the teacher, but it's not the best way to assess for the students. But NCEA is becoming better, that you can now use verbal assessment and video assessment, but it's just hard logistically with a big class. So it's looking at what works well and what's realistic.
So I think a good teacher does have good kind of assessment strategies.
Having effective assessments and different assessments and doing things different ways is really important, and things which suit the learners.
What I have found while interviewing my respondents is that they know what it takes to be a good teacher. However, this isn't always realistic with 150 students coming in and out of your classes each day. I also found that the Year 13 I interviewed viewed some things differently than the teachers I interviewed. For example, he thought teaching students individually would be easier. However, the teachers I interviewed found this unrealistic. Pax was obviously one of those students who was able to get one-on-one learning opportunities. However, I don't think this is a clear representation of all students, as there was only 8 other students in his class. Therefore, it would be really interesting to conduct a wider survey to see differentiation within a larger class. It was quite fascinating to see all my respondents saw technology as the next big thing in teaching. From my perspective, I agree that technology is the way of the future. It allows connections with students outside of the classroom and provides a wider range of teaching strategies to ensure that I guide my students to become lifelong learners. It is evident from all of the respondents that the characteristics of the best evidence synthesis are accurate as to what makes an effective teacher. I will always try to implement these characteristics in my teaching practice to ensure that I guide my students to become lifelong learners. Another thing all my respondents agreed to was that there should be a variety of engaging activities, strategies, and approaches, because not all students learn the same way. A strong message that came out while interviewing my respondents was that the focus should always be on the students, not on the teachers. The main thing I am taking away from doing this documentary is that there are many types of good teachers, and that teaching is always changing and adapting. So to be a good teacher, you must always be reflecting, changing, and adapting on your own work.